A billionaire visits his son's grave just like every year. But this time, a young boy is already standing there before him. No flowers, no greeting, just holding a worn silver toy Karen, whispering a name that brings the father to his knees. Liam. From that moment, a secret begins to unravel about a boy no one remembered, who once saved an entire little world with silent love, an old toy car, and the time his own father never gave him. This is not a story about death. It is the journey of a father's rebirth and an invisible gift tone that changed hundreds of lives from beyond the grave. Every year, on that exact day, Alexander Reed disappeared from the world's schedule. No shareholder meetings, no phone calls, no press. A tech billionaire could retreat from the noise of life with just a click but. This time, his retreat wasn't for rest. It was to grieve. The black SUV pulled up at the edge of a cemetery on the outskirts of Santa Monica. The October sky was overcast, gray clouds looming, as if to swallow the last remnants of autumn's light. Alexander remained in the car for a few more minutes, his palm tightening around an old leather glove habit he'd held onto since the accident. The face once featured on Forbes covers, once praised as the steel mind of Silicon Valley, was now just the face of a father who had lost his son. No bodyguards, no assistants, no cameras. He stepped out of the vehicle, each movement slow, as if every step stirred memories he had never been ready to confront. Charcoal trench coat, white shirt, left unbuttoned at the collar, gray tie hanging loose. No longer the NASDAQ titan, just a man coming to visit the grave of the only child he never had time to understand. A gravel path led him past hundreds of cold stone markers. The air was eerily silent only. The rustling of dry grass and the wind through the eucalyptus trees could be heard. He stopped in front of a modest headstone. No flowers, no portrait, just a line etched deeply, like a blade. Liam James Reed, beloved son, forever missed. He stood still. No one knew that this headstone had nearly never existed. Alexander had once planned to scatter his son's ashes at sea. But he'd changed his mind, because he hadn't yet said the words, "I'm sorry." He knelt, pulling a single white rose from his coat pocket. He laid it down so gently it didn't even disturb the fallen leaf lying beside it. No tears, no tremble, but his eyes. They held a storm, buried deep beneath layers of stone. As he began to rise, ready to leave like every year returning to a life without Liam, something stopped him cold. Across the headstone, directly opposite him, stood a small figure, a boy, around 9 or 10 years old. Worn-out blue hoodie, frayed jeans, dusty sneakers, messy brown hair, holding something small in his hand. A silver toy car? Alexander squinted. The boy stood motionless, unaware of being watched. He bowed his head, whispering something so softly that even the wind couldn't catch it. The stillness around Liam's grave suddenly felt different. This had always been a sacred, private place no one else had ever come. No friends, no colleagues, and certainly no nameless children. Alexander approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't want to startle the boy, but couldn't just stand there in silence either. "What are you doing here, son?" His voice broke the fog, laden quiet, firm but calm. The boy flinched. His eyes widened, gray-blue like a stormy sky. But there was no fear in them, only a quiet astonishment, as if pulled back from another world. He hesitated before answering. "I just came to visit Liam." Alexander's heart stopped. "Liam, you knew my son?" he asked, his voice dropping low. The boy nodded, eyes still fixed on the grave. "He used to come to the hospital I was in. There, people called him Liam West, but I knew his real name was Liam Reed." Alexander froze. Liam had never mentioned visiting any hospital, much less using a false name. The boy looked up at him, then slowly extended what he had been holding, a silver metal race car, scratched and aged, but clearly well cared for. "He gave me this. He said it would help me get through everything." The car. Alexander recognized it instantly. It was from a collection he'd given Liam when he was 5. Liam used to carry it everywhere in his little backpack, and then one day, it was gone. Now, here it was back again, in the hands of a stranger, standing before Liam's grave. "What's your name, son?" Alexander asked, struggling to steady his voice. Noah Carter." In that instant, Alexander knew this year's visit to the grave would not be just another repetition of old memories. It was the beginning of something he had never dared to believe. The wind whispered softly through the trees in the distance, but between Alexander and Noah, neither said a word for almost a full minute. A minute that might have seemed fleeting, but to Alexander, it stretched like a silent sentence. He looked at the boy standing just a few steps away. A thin, wiry child who clearly didn't belong in this quiet cemetery. But those eyes, the way Noah looked at Liam's headstone, carried something eerily familiar. Not the curiosity of a stranger, but the tenderness of someone who had once been close. Alexander slowed his breathing. He knew that if he stayed silent, he would never understand why a child like this had come to this place, or why something deep in his heart was trembling, like an invisible string had just been plucked awake. "Noah," he called softly, his voice wavering a little. "Where did you meet Liam?" The boy hesitated, then answered, slowly. "Hope Hill Medical Center, the long-term children's ward." Alexander froze. He knew of that hospital, but only as a fading name on one of the company's donation lists. In his mind, it was a small, underfunded public facility, tucked away on the edge of the city like something forgotten. Why did Liam go there?" he asked. Noah gripped the toy car in his hand. His gaze, once childlike, now carried an uncanny maturity. At first he read us stories, then he brought toys. Sometimes he just sat with us, for the days we were in too much pain to speak. He came every week, never missed it except the last time. Alexander swallowed hard. A sharp ache hit his chest, like someone had pressed a thumb into an old, unhealed scar. "How did you know it was Liam?" "Liam Reed?" he asked. "One time, I saw him staring at an old article on his phone. There was a picture of him with you." Noah looked down. "I asked him, but he just smiled. He said, 'Don't worry about it. I'm just someone who likes to tell stories.'" Alexander clenched his hand. The son he thought he knew had lived a completely different life. A hidden world, untouched by technology, untouched by ambition, untouched by wealth-just silent hospital beds, and a young man who showed up with a smile. How did Liam even find that hospital?" he murmured, almost asking himself. Noah looked up. "The nurses said one day he got lost visiting someone else. He saw a little girl crying alone in the hallway. He sat beside her and never left." Alexander lowered his head. Suddenly, the image of Liam in his memory began to tremble. No longer the boy trained to play piano and code by age 10. No longer the Stanford computer science prodigy, but a quiet soul who had chosen a path no one had ever known. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out another object, a small notebook with frayed corners. He held it out, hands slightly shaking. This was Liam's. He gave it to me before the last time he came to the hospital." Alexander opened the notebook. Inside were dozens of handwritten pages, childlike drawings and loving notes, little poems, scribbled sketches of hospital kids seen through imagination. On the last page, in faint pencil, was a line: "If one day you meet my father, give him this notebook and tell him he did the right thing." Alexander felt as if someone had squeezed his heart in their fist. All the speeches he'd prepared for the media now seemed hollow. And here was a small, trembling notebook in the hands of a child that carried more weight than any empire. Noah hesitated a moment, then opened his backpack and pulled out an old Devicia first-generation music player. He pressed play, skipping to the last recording, and held it to Alexander's ear. A voice played. "Hey Noah, if I don't make it next time, don't worry. I'm not going far. Oh, and if Mr. Alexander ever hears this, I hope he knows I didn't do this to make anyone proud. I just couldn't turn away when someone was hurting. I know, Dad might not understand. But if he ever does hear this, then thank you. Because you were the one who taught me not to fear failure." Alexander trembled. He pulled off the earphones, unable to speak. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, almost as if the whole world had come to witness the moment a father's heart cracked open not from grief, but from finally glimpsing a part of his son's soul that he had never truly seen. No one else was in the cemetery. Just Alexander and Noah between them. A truth too vast, too silent, too beautiful to describe in words. Noah looked up at him, and for the first time, gently asked, "Mr. Alexander, I guess you never really knew what Liam had become, did you?" Alexander looked at Noah, and in a hoarse voice he answered, "No, Noah, I never did." The wind had calmed. A faint sunlight began to peek through, casting its glow on the cold headstones. But Alexander Reed was still standing there-rooted in place, as if unable to leave the grave, or the boy who had just pulled him from the depths of everything he never knew. He glanced at Noah the child, who had handed him a small notebook, a half-finished recording, and a piece of Liam's memory that he, Liam's only father, had never touched. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice now softer, stripped of its usual calculated tone. "In the car. Over there." Noah pointed toward a silver sedan parked at the end of the gravel path. "Every time I visit Liam, she lets me go alone. She says, 'This moment belongs to me.'" Alexander hesitated, not because he didn't know what to do, but because it had been so long since he'd remembered how to begin a conversation person to person. He was used to commanding, directing, signing contracts, convincing investors with charts and numbers. But here, in this quiet cemetery, he was just a father grieving his son and listening to a child say the things he should have been there to witness himself. "Do you and your mom have any plans?" he asked, still eyeing the silver car. Noah shook his head. "Probably just heading home. Mom has the night shift." Alexander nodded slightly. Then, as if an instinct long buried stirred from within, he said, "Would you like to have lunch with me? You and your mom?" Noah looked up, his eyes lighting up before flickering with hesitation. "I need to ask her first." He ran back to the car. Alexander stood where he was, heart thumping in a way he couldn't explain. It had been over a decade since he'd invited anyone to lunch without a business agenda. Moments later, Noah returned, his face bright. She said, "If you don't mind, we'd love to." 15 minutes later, the three of them sat in a small diner on a street corner. Not a five-star restaurant with white linen and wine lists, just a warm, unpretentious place, filled with the scent of grilled meats and fresh bread. A place where strangers sat close, shared spoons of soup and passing laughter. Rachel Carter, Noah's mother, was a woman in her early 30s. Her brown hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, yet glowing with the quiet strength of someone who had weathered many long winters. She wore a light jacket, a chipped old watch, and spoke in a voice so soft it seemed careful not to trouble anyone. "Thank you for the invitation." "But you didn't have to," she said after placing their order. Alexander shook his head, his eyes still fixed on Noah, who was busy playing with the toy car on the table. "I'd like to know more about Liam, if that's okay." A flicker of pause. Then Rachel offered a smile bittersweet and kind. "I suppose you're his father. Honestly, I didn't know until I saw you standing beside my son." Alexander blinked, surprised. "You didn't know Liam was my son?" Rachel shook her head. "We never knew his last name. He always introduced himself as Liam West. Not until after the accident, when a nurse recognized his face on the news. Everyone at the hospital was shocked. No one ever guessed he came from a famous family." Alexander fell silent. "Liam never told anyone?" "Not once. He came without needing to be noticed. Always brought a few books, a bag of cookies, sometimes a toy or two. But what he brought most was time." That last word, time, landed like a direct blow to Alexander's chest. His entire life, he had given Liam the most expensive things: Swiss watches, private schools abroad, elite scholarships. But time? Number. He had never given him that. Rachel continued, "I remember once my son was in a panic before his third surgery. Liam sat beside him for nearly 5 hours telling stories, drawing, talking about planets. When Noah finally drifted off, I came to thank him, but he just said, 'No need to thank me. This is the best day of my week.'" Alexander couldn't speak. His back curved slightly, as though a weight he'd never named was slowly falling off his shoulders, released through the simple words of a single mother. Their meals arrived. Noah ate his soup with the carefree joy of a child, keeping the toy car close by as if afraid it might disappear if he let it go. Alexander looked up, for the first time meeting Rachel's eyes directly. "I didn't know any of this. I thought I knew my son." Rachel smiled gently, without judgment, and simply said, "There are things people only show when no one knows who they are." Alexander fell silent. Once again, he was learning about Liam not through records or accolades, but through the eyes of those he had quietly saved. And that luncheon, an ordinary diner, beside two people who had been strangers just an hour ago, became the moment Alexander realized He may have missed the most precious years with his son, but he still had time to not miss the legacy Liam had left behind. 2 days after that strange lunch with Noah and Rachel, Alexander Reed stood before the white-painted iron gates of Hope Hill Medical Center, a place he had never imagined himself visiting in all the years past. The building wasn't tall. It wasn't modern. The paint peeled from its lower walls, and its glass doors were fogged with age and condensation. There were no flashy digital signs, no polished logos like the institutions his company usually funded. Yet something warm and deeply human lingered in every worn detail. As if this place didn't try to be beautiful, it only needed to be kind to survive. Alexander stepped in, palms slightly damp with sweat. No assistant, no advance call, no scheduled appointment. For the first time in his life, he wanted a meeting with no agenda. At the small front desk, a young nurse was folding papers. When he approached, she looked up and froze. You're Liam's father, aren't you?" Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes lit up as if she'd just recognized a long-lost memory. Alexander nodded. "Yes, I'm Liam's father." Just that one sentence. But the atmosphere in the reception area shifted entirely. Within 10 minutes, somehow, nearly the entire staff on duty, doctors, nurses, even an elderly security guard, had gathered around him. No one said anything dramatic, but in every gaze was something sacred, something reverent. An older nurse named Maria reached out and held his hand. "We've waited for this day, though none of us ever dared believe it would come." She led him down a hallway. On either side were treatment room doors, each one a silent witness to Liam's quiet visits. Maria stopped outside a small room, its walls covered in crayon drawings. On the table lay a few well-worn picture books and a stack of faded comic books. This was the room Liam came to most. He'd sit on the floor, leaning against the wall, and read stories to the kids. His voice had something that made them forget the pain. Some even called him the comic book doctor. Alexander gave a faint smile, the first in days, and gently sat on the worn-out rug. It was coarse, cold, but he didn't care. Another staff member, Carla, opened her phone and showed him a short video. In it, Liam sat surrounded by 3 bald, frail children, all laughing hysterically as he made silly faces and mimicked a dinosaur's voice. His face beamed, his eyes alight with energy. Nothing like the quiet son Alexander thought he knew. None of us knew he was a billionaire's son. He came as someone ordinary, someone real. He brought toys, sweets, sometimes nothing at all, just sat beside a kid who couldn't sleep. Alexander sat in silence. How many times had he, himself, sat with Liam as a child? He could count them on one hand, yet here his son was doing it for dozens of sick, lonely children and doing it with all his heart. Then a middle-aged man approached and introduced himself as Dr. Rowe, head of the pediatric therapy department. "Did you know?" he began slowly. "We once had a patient named Emily. After a major surgery, she didn't speak a single word for nearly 2 months. Every psychological method failed." Alexander tilted his head. And then Liam came. He didn't try to force conversation. No pressure. He just sat with Emily each week, drawing, playing dolls, telling stories. By the 5th week, she whispered her first words. Dr. Rowe looked Alexander in the eyes. From the moment Emily said his name, we knew Liam wasn't just a good person. He was faith itself. Alexander turned away, on the verge of tears, but held them back. Maria handed him a thin folder. "These are pictures we once meant to send to Liam's family, but we never knew who to contact. Now, they belong to you." He opened it. One photo showed Liam in a cowboy hat, dancing with a boy who had lost a leg. Another, he was placing superhero face masks on 3 little girls undergoing chemotherapy. One image made Alexander pause the longest. Liam, sitting alone in an IV room, gently cradling a sleeping boy in his lap. His eyes were closed not in exhaustion, but in peace. The folder closed. Alexander clutched it tightly, then looked up, voice thick. "I've never been prouder." Maria squeezed his hand firmly. "You may not have been here while Liam lived like a hero, but you're here now to continue it." Alexander left the hospital that day without saying much. But deep within, something had shifted. No longer was his question, "Why did my son die?" Now it had become, "How did my son live?" And the answer was more beautiful than anything he had ever imagined. When Alexander Reed stepped into his company's headquarters for the first time after nearly a week of absence, every eye turned to him. The marble lobby remained as cold as ever. The chrome-plated elevators reflected the faces of passers-by. The massive screen continued flashing NASDAQ numbers and the latest finance headlines. Everything was the same, except him. He wore a simpler suit than usual. No tie, no entourage. And for the first time in years, no watch on his wrist. As he entered the boardroom on the 42nd floor, the board of directors, those who had fought alongside him for decades, stood up instinctively. "We were worried about you," one member said. "After the media coverage of your hospital visit, the press seems to be painting you as a completely different man." Alexander said nothing. He stepped to the chairman's seat, placed his leather briefcase on the table, and began. "I'm not here to explain myself. I'm here to make a choice." The room tensed. Members exchanged glances. "What kind of choice, Alexander?" asked a major shareholder, hand resting on the quarterly earnings report. Alexander opened the briefcase. He pulled out a proposal, not an expansion strategy, not a new startup acquisition, but the draft for a nonprofit foundation, the Liam Reed Fund. "I want the company to invest in this. 5% of net quarterly profits to support children with cancer, rare diseases, and those without families. And I want to oversee it directly." A soft scoff came from the end of the table. "You can't be serious, Alex. Do you know how much that figure means? Shareholders won't sit quietly while we funnel dividends into charity." Alexander looked up, but his gaze wasn't asking for permission. It was declaring intent. "I used to think like all of you, measured everything by numbers. But now I see if my son, at 21, could spend his final year caring for children he didn't even know, then I, with all this power, have no excuse to stand still." "And what about the company?" another voice interjected. "Your image, our strategy, shareholder confidence." Alexander sat down, hands clasped. "I don't want to be anyone's image anymore. I just want to be a father who doesn't miss the second chance he's been given." Silence filled the room. A silence not built on profit, or growth targets, or quarterly graphs, but on the raw weight of a decision. To hold on to an empire, or to carry forward what Liam had begun. Finally, Alexander reached for another document. Quietly, he signed it. "This is my resignation. I will divest all my shares and transfer them to the foundation. If anyone objects, I'll take full legal responsibility." A younger executive head of strategy murmured, "But you're the face of this company. If you leave, we lose." Alexander gently cut in. "You'll lose a man good at talking, but you'll gain one who finally knows how to listen." And he stood. No applause, no ceremony. Just a father walking out of the tower he once built to step onto the path his son had drawn. Not in architectural renderings, but in scribbled pencil lines across old notebooks in a children's hospital. That afternoon, when news of his resignation broke, the investment world was stunned. Some outlets called it a humanitarian PR campaign to clean up post-crisis optics. Others speculated, is Alexander Reed restructuring in the shadows? But only one person knew the truth. Noah. The boy sat by the hospital window, toy car still in hand. As Rachel, his mother, read the article and went quiet, Noah smiled and whispered, "Liam knows now. He knows his dad hurt him." Alexander declined all interview requests. He vanished from the financial world as he once withdrew from the media years ago. But this time, he wasn't running away. This time, he was returning as someone entirely new. That night, he sat alone in the house that once echoed with Liam's piano. On the table lay the old notebook Noah had given him and a photo frame he had just found. A picture of Liam at 8 years old, beaming, holding a silver toy car. Alexander lifted the photo, eyes misted. He didn't speak loudly, just mouthed a whisper into the quiet. "Liam, this time, I won't miss it." 6 weeks after Alexander Reed stepped away from the tech empire he had built with his own hands, he appeared not on a TED stage, not at an investment summit, but in a long, worn hallway of a small community hospital in South Los Angeles. No VIP badge, no cameras, no staff entourage. Just him and a deep blue canvas tote bag filled with comic books, coloring stories, cookies, and buildable toys. The man who once addressed global forums and pitched to thousands with holographic slides now stood, awkwardly, in front of a children's hospital room door, decorated with a hand-drawn pink elephant. and a crayon-scrawled sign. Ava's room, 5 years old, doesn't like needles. Alexander took a deep breath. "All right," he muttered. "Today's not about me. It's about him." He knocked gently on the doorframe. A nurse answered, momentarily surprised to see an older man in a plain button-down shirt, smiling sheepishly with nothing but that blue toad in hand. She smiled back and stepped aside, letting him in. Inside, little Ava, her hair nearly gone from chemotherapy, sat curled in a corner of her bed, staring out the window. Her eyes held a look that struck Alexander instantly. He had seen that same look before on Liam, once in 5th grade, sitting alone on the backyard railing after being bullied at school. "Hi there," he said softly. "I'm Alex. I brought cookies and a few silly things. Do you like comics?" Ava turned her head, cautious. But when she saw the oversized Spider-Man comic Alexander pulled from his bag, her eyes lit up just a little. Minutes later, he was on the floor, never mind the wrinkled clothes or the dull ache in his back, reading aloud and doing voices, just like Liam once did. Ava giggled when he tried a monster growl. And in that moment, Alexander knew. He had just done something he hadn't done enough. In 21 years of fatherhood, he stayed. From that day forward, Alexander came to the hospital every week. Not as a guest of honor, but as an ordinary volunteer. He learned how to coax children into taking their medicine, how to play with autistic kids, how to simply sit beside a child who couldn't speak just to hold their hand when they needed to know someone was there. One day, he visited Miguel, a boy with bone cancer who had lost a leg. Alexander asked, "Would you like me to read you a story?" Miguel scowled. "I hate books." Alexander grinned. "Then how about we tell a story with Lego?" They built a spaceship together for nearly 2 hours. At the end, Miguel looked up and said, "You're like Liam." Alexander froze. His eyes welled up. "You knew Liam?" Miguel nodded. "He gave me this orange piece right here. Said it was the exit hatch to the universe. He told me, whenever I look at it, I have to believe I can still fly." Alexander touched the piece. It was cold in his fingers, but his heart felt warm. That night, Alexander didn't return to the echoing halls of his empty mansion. He went to a modest apartment next to the hospital loan he had quietly rented so he'd never be far. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo frame Liam, grinning with the silver toy car in his hand. Beside it sat the real toy car, now carefully cleaned, placed reverently on a shelf of its own. He sat down, opened his laptop, and began to write a letter. Not to send, just to write. "My son, today, I did a monster voice. I got the character names all wrong, and the kids laughed at me. But I didn't feel embarrassed, because I think maybe you once sat in that same room, doing exactly what I did today. And now I finally understand. Helping someone laugh heaven just for a few minutes can heal wounds that money will never touch." News of former billionaire Reed made its way into a few lifestyle columns. Some dismissed it as a rebranding campaign. But those who had seen him sitting in the Hope Hill corridor, coloring beside a paralyzed child, knew he wasn't doing this for optics. He was doing it for redemption. One Friday afternoon, after reading time, he sat with Rachel and Noah in the hospital cafeteria. Noah talked about his science test. Rachel shared a story about a difficult customer at the diner. Alexander listened without interrupting, without redirecting the conversation to investments or legacy. Just listening. Noah looked up, beaming. "Hey, Mr. Alex." "Yes, buddy? You didn't forget a single character's name today." Alexander burst into laughter, a laugh that, for the first time, didn't feel forced. "Guess that means I'm finally doing something right, huh?" Rachel looked at them both, then softly added, "Liam would be proud." Alexander didn't respond. He just nodded. And in his eyes, there was no sorrow anymore. Only light. The kind his son had once planted in the hearts of forgotten children. And now, at last, that light had found its way back to him. 3 months after the Liam Reed Foundation was established, Alexander Reed organized a special gala just to raise funds, but to finally tell a story that had never been told in full. The story of Liam not as the son of a billionaire, but as a quiet young man who changed lives with small, extraordinary acts. The chosen venue wasn't a 5-star hotel as many expected. It was a renovated community center once, an old movie theater restored with funding from the foundation's first donation. Soft yellow lights, polished wood floors with their old scratches preserved, and neatly arranged chairs. Nothing extravagant, but warm and honest. Just like the spirit of the boy being honored. The guests weren't politicians, celebrities, or top-tier press. They were doctors, nurses, teachers, and dozens of families whose children had once been treated at Hope Hill. Many of the children once wheelchair-bound, once battling cancer, once teetering between life and death now, arrived in little dresses and tidy suits, their eyes glowing as they passed photo displays of Liam lining the main hallway. One corner of the room had been transformed into Liam's Memory Corner, where the children's gifts from him were carefully displayed. Sketchbooks, toy trains, stuffed animals, and handwritten cards. Some still bore faded crayon marks. Some had illegible scribbles, but each one held a message that made hearts tighten. No matter how much tomorrow hurts, you are still the strongest person I've ever met. Alexander arrived early, checking every detail personally. He didn't wear a tuxedo, just a simple black suit, a white shirt, and instead of a tie, a small silver race car, pin identical to the one Liam had once given Noah. Noah was there too, dressed in a crisp white shirt, hair neatly combed, sitting in the front row beside his mother. In his hand, as always, he held the silver toy Kara's, if part of a sacred ritual that required no explanation. When the lights dimmed, a soft spotlight fell on a simple wooden stage. Alexander stepped up. He looked around the room. Nearly 200 people. Nearly 200 stories of Liam that he had never known. For the first time in his life, he felt small but perfectly in place. He began, voice steady, slow. A year ago, I stood over my son's grave, believing I had lost everything. I thought the world he left behind was nothing more than a few photos, a couple of articles, a name on a degree. He paused, his voice tightening slightly. I was wrong. The room held its breath. Somewhere in the back, someone sniffled. I used to think I was successful. I built companies, created jobs, topped charts. But Liam, he didn't build empires. He built hope. Alexander reached into his pocket and unfolded a slip of paper page from the notebook Noah had given him. He read aloud, slowly. If a child can smile on their worst day, then that day isn't completely dark. A quiet wave of emotion passed through the room. Heads nodded, eyes shimmered. In the golden light, those words seemed to float through the air, touching everyone present. I'm not here to say my son was perfect. I'm here to say I didn't know how extraordinary he truly was until I heard each of you speak. Then he turned toward Noah. His gaze softened as if speaking without words. Thank you, Noah, for showing me my son, with nothing more than a small toy car and a very big heart. The room rose in applause, not for the speech's eloquence, but because, for the first time, they saw a father truly bowing to the quiet legacy of his child. Then came the most powerful moment of the night. 5 children, once helped by Liam, stepped onto the stage to share their memories. One burst into tears, recalling how Liam had once given her a box of colored pencils. Another described how Liam turned his infusion room into a spaceship control center. And one boy, still using crutches, stood straight and said, Liam wasn't a doctor, but he healed people. Alexander stood silently in the corner. He didn't interrupt, didn't need to be seen anymore, because tonight, the spotlight belonged to Liam, and everyone knew it. The evening closed with a special video made by Hope Hill's nursing staff, dozens of clips. Liam strumming a ukulele. Liam cracking jokes. Liam getting hit in the face with cake. Liam reading to a little girl named Hannah as she drifted off to sleep in his lap. When the screen finally faded to black, the room didn't move. And then, a wave of applause erupted. Not prompted, not choreographed, but rising from one place only, the hearts that had been touched. That night, after everyone had left, Alexander remained alone in the now empty hall. He walked slowly to the final table in the back, where one small envelope sat. On the front, in careful, childlike handwriting, it read, "For the man who raised a hero." Alexander opened it. Inside was a crayon drawing. Liam standing among smiling children, wearing a superhero cape, beaming. Below the drawing, one sentence. Not everyone who wears a cape is a hero, but he was mine. Alexander bowed his head. Tears fell not from pain, but from something deeper. Gratitude. The morning after the memorial gala, Alexander Reed woke earlier than usual. He no longer lived in the 1,000-square-meter Beverly Hills mansion with its 10 silent bedrooms and marble floors. Now he lived in a modest 3-bedroom apartment near Hope Hill Hospital, where morning sunlight slipped easily through the wooden-framed windows. At the kitchen table, Noah was already seated, sandwich in hand, wearing a crisp white shirt, green khaki pants, and a backpack ready for the first school day of the week. "Why are you up so early?" Noah asked, still half asleep. Alexander smiled, pouring more milk into the boy's glass. "Because I have something important to do today." "What is it?" He bent down slightly, meeting Noah's eyes. "Today, I'm taking the Liam Foundation to a place my son never had the chance to reach." That day, Alexander launched the expansion of the Liam Reed Foundation not by sending money into hospital accounts, but through a simple idea: a national network of time givers. He handwrote letters to the first 100 recipients, not billionaires, not CEOs, but nurses, teachers, volunteers, bus drivers, school cafeteria cooks, people who had once been touched by Liam or who lived with the same spirit he had carried. Each letter contained one sentence: "You don't need money to change the world. You just need to be there when someone needs you." And with each letter came a tiny object, a silver race car, precisely replicated from the one Liam had given Noah. The campaign spread within a week. Each person who received the miniature car would pass it on after completing a kind act: reading to a sick child, fixing a lonely woman's leaking roof, tutoring a struggling student. On social media, the hashtag number Liam's car began trending at lightning speed. Heartfelt videos and photos captured small but powerful moments. A father carrying his disabled daughter across a collapsed bridge, a college student singing to cancer patients, an elderly man closing his store for a day to drive a boy to free therapy. At first, the media speculated this was a calculated PR campaign. But when Alexander was seen quietly sitting at public schools, homeless shelters, remote clinics, saying nothing, taking no photos, simply listening, they realized this man had truly changed. Meanwhile, his bond with Noah deepened. He wasn't just the man who once knew Liam's friend's father. He became part of Noah's daily rhythm. He walked Noah to school, attended parent-teacher meetings with Rachel, helped build his science project on propulsion. One evening, staring blankly at a stack of 5th-grade math problems, Alexander laughed. "I used to manage thousands of employees, but I can't solve this one question." Noah burst out laughing. "You need to work on your reflexes. Maybe I should hire you as my tutor. I accept payment in pizza." One afternoon, as they shared ice cream after school, Noah suddenly asked, "Do you think, if Liam were still here, what would he be doing now?" Alexander paused, looked up at the sky. Maybe he wouldn't be building schools or hospitals. Maybe he'd just sit beside someone who feels alone. Noah nodded, whispering, "Just like you're doing now." Alexander turned toward him. For the first time, he felt no distance between himself and the younger generation. Between him and his son, between him and the version of himself he used to be. They had all become one in the circle Liam had unknowingly drawn. A week later, at a national education conference, Alexander was invited to speak. They expected a lecture on leadership in education, but he stepped onto the stage, held up a tiny silver car, and told the story of a nameless young man who once walked into a community hospital, read stories, gave out cookies, and never left a business card. He ended with, "I'm not here as an expert. I'm here as a father who was taught how to be his own son." The audience rose to its feet not because he was Alexander Reed, but because they realized they could all be Liam in their own way. That night, as the two of them watched cartoons on the couch, Noah leaned his head against Alexander's shoulder and quietly asked, "Do you think people can find family, even if they've already lost it?" Alexander paused. He didn't rush the answer. He squeezed the boy's shoulder gently. "Some families are born of blood. Others are born of belief. I think we're both." Noah smiled a smile that mirrored Liam's when he was little, racing that silver toy car across the living room floor. And for the first time, Alexander Reed no longer lived for the past. He was now living forward, carrying on what his son had begun. Winter came early to Northern California. Cold wind howled through the narrow streets of Willow Creek, a small town most people only heard about when passing through on their way somewhere else. But in that town stood a small community hospital, and inside it was a very special child. His name was Logan Wells, 6 years old. He had once been an energetic little boy, obsessed with superheroes, and able to recite all the planets in the solar system. Until one fateful afternoon nearly 2 years ago, a car crash took his mother's life and left Logan with severe brain trauma. He stopped speaking, stopped crying, wouldn't look anyone in the eyes for more than 3 seconds. Doctors called it acute post-traumatic stress disorder. He became a quiet shadow within the hospital walls, with no remaining family able to care for him. Then, one October day, a young volunteer from the Liam Reed Foundation arrived in Willow Creek for a routine outreach visit, reading to children, bringing toy cars, and sharing stories from the Number Liam's Car campaign. Her name was Emilia, senior psychology student, and she chose Logan as her first companion. For hours, she sat beside him, just as Liam once had with others. No questions, no pressure. She placed a silver toy car on the table and spoke gently about a young man who once used this very car to help children feel fast and strong, even when they were stuck in bed. At first, Logan didn't react. His eyes remained dull, lost in a world far away. On day 2, he reached out just briefly to touch the car. By day 5, he began lining up the toy cars arranged, exactly like the old photo of Liam that the doctors had pinned to the hospital bulletin board. On day 10, he whispered, "One word, just one." "Liam," Emily gasped. Her breath caught in her throat. She immediately alerted the staff. They didn't believe it at first. A child who hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. And his first word back was a name? 3 days later, Alexander Reed arrived in Willow Creek. He didn't come alone. Noah was with him for the first time venturing out of the city since his recovery. In the waiting room, Alexander met with Emily and listened closely. She showed him the security footage. Logan lifting the silver car, pressing it to his cheek, then whispering, "Liam." Alexander said nothing. He sat still, hands trembling as he held the toy car in the image. When granted permission to visit Logan's room, he had no idea what to expect. The boy sat on the bed, gaze distant. But when he saw Alexander's eyes resembling the photo of Liam, kept on the nightstand, he froze. 1 second, 2, then slowly, silently, he lifted the car. Gently, pressed it to his cheek. Alexander stepped forward, then knelt before the boy. He didn't reach out. He simply placed a hand over his heart and breathed deeply. "Do you know Liam?" Logan didn't answer. But for the first time, his eyes found focus. They locked onto Alexander's. No fear, no haze, just recognition. And then he spoke, softly, faintly, but real. "Liam is my friend." Tears streamed down Alexander's face. Not a sob, not a collapse, but a silent, cleansing rain washing away years of unnamed pain. The story of Logan spread quickly. Some headlines called it a miracle sparked by a toy. Others speculated psychological factors, coincidence, the power of association. Alexander didn't care. What he knew was this: Liam may be gone, but somehow, some way, his presence lived on through memory, through that small silver car, and through the way others continued what he began. Weeks later, Alexander invited Logan and his care team to visit Hope Hill. Noah greeted him first. Though a few years older, the two boys seemed to understand each other instantly through a language that needed no words. Alexander had prepared a surprise. In the hospital's new garden wing, a special outdoor space had been created. Liam's corner with small tables, shelves of children's books, and a mini plastic racetrack for toy cars. The sign read, "A place where every child has the right to be strong, even in silent battles." Liam Reed. At the dedication ceremony, Alexander gave a few opening remarks. But this time, he didn't speak alone. He invited Logan to the stage. The boy, still shy, walked up, gripping the familiar silver car. Emily stood behind him for support. Logan took a deep breath, and then spoke louder than he ever had. "Thank you, Liam, for not leaving me, even when I couldn't speak." No one could hold back tears. That night, back at the apartment, Alexander and Noah sat on the balcony, watching the stars. Noah turned and asked, "Do you think Liam knows all of this happened?" Alexander didn't answer right away. He looked to the sky, then said softly, "I think he doesn't need to know, because he planted the seed. And now, you, me, Logan, we're growing it. Noah nodded, then rested his head on Alexander's shoulder just as he always did. And in that quiet moment, Alexander Reed knew. He was no longer a father haunted by the past. He was now a man fully alive, living for the light his son left behind. Autumn had arrived in Monterey's coastal city, known for its jagged cliffs, circling seabirds lost in mist, and the sting of salt wind weaving through your fingers. It had once been Liam's favorite place. Alexander Reed knew that well. He was the one who had driven Liam here the summer of 10th grade just once. After that, Liam had returned alone, never telling anyone. Only when Alexander read the first pages of the old notebook Noah had given him did he discover, "Today I sat in front of the ocean in Monterey. There's something in the waves that makes me feel less alone. If one day I'm no longer here, I hope Dad comes to this place. Not to cry, but to understand." Alexander had folded that page shut. He hadn't dared read further. But now, here he was, standing on that same rocky shore, with Noah beside him. The boy held his hand tightly, as if sensing something deeply personal was stirring inside the man next to him. There were no reporters, no announcements. No one knew they were here. Rachel had hesitated at first to let Noah travel so far, but Alexander had reassured her, "I'm not taking him on a vacation. I'm taking him to the place where a part of Liam still lives." By the time they arrived at the coast, the sun was tilting toward the horizon. Waves crashed not violently, but steady. The sky glowed amber orange, casting melting streaks of light across the water. Alexander led Noah along a narrow, rocky path. At its end was a jutting outcrop, the same one from the photo he once saw. Liam had sat there, notebook in hand, feet dangling above foamy waves, writing. There was no photo now, but Alexander remembered his son's face vividly from that picture, the look in his eyes calm, a peace Alexander knew he had never given him. They sat together on the rock. Wind tangled their hair. The ocean's brine clung to their skin. The sun inched lower, slower, deeper into the evening. Noah spoke first. "Why do you think Liam chose this place to write his journal?" Alexander stared out at the sea, voice low and steady. "Maybe because here he didn't have to be anyone else. Not Liam, my son, not the Stanford student, just someone who knew the world, needed kindness." Noah nodded. Then from his backpack, he pulled out the same note-buno wrapped in clear plastic. He flipped to the first page, the one with handwriting different from all the others. Alexander read it aloud slowly. "Day 1, I'll try helping someone without saying my name. No trace. No thanks. Just to see if the feeling is real." He paused. His voice trembled slightly. I think he did find that feeling, more than anyone who ever chased success. A strong gust blew past. Noah clutched the notebook tightly, then said, "You used to say you regret not being there for the most important moments with Liam." Alexander said nothing. Noah looked at him not with blame, but the kind of gaze that gently asks, "Does it still hurt here? But if you had done things differently, would Liam still have become who he was?" Alexander turned to him. The question opened a door he'd kept shut for years. He whispered, "I used to believe I was the reason he lacked love. That if I'd stayed home more, listened better, maybe he wouldn't have had to look for affection in strangers. And now?" Alexander held Noah's kazu. "Now, I think maybe it was my silence that taught him how to listen, and my absence that made him create connection for other children who had none." From his coat pocket, Alexander pulled out the original silver car still with a small scratch on its tail, a mark Liam had made racing it down the hallway as a boy. He placed it on a flat stone at the cliff's edge, pointing it toward the sea. "My son," he said, not loud, not quiet, "I'm sorry for not listening, but now I've listened to the world through the voices of those you touched." Noah's eyes shimmered. "You don't need forgiveness, you know." Alexander turned, eyes softening for the first time. "I'm not looking for forgiveness. I just want to live, like someone who deserves to be called Dad." They stayed there, side by side, until the sun sank fully below the horizon. The silver car glimmered in the fading light, like a tiny sailboat with no engine, somehow knowing its way toward peace. As they stood to leave, Alexander turned for one last look. "Liam, I didn't come here to say goodbye. I came to say you were right." Then he took Noah's hand. "Let's go home, kid. We've got work to do." Noah smiled and squeezed his hand back. Two soul-sown, older, one young, one who had lost, one who had been left behind, walking toward the golden lights of the city, leaving behind not sorrow, but a chapter finally closed with understanding. That spring, the Liam Reed Foundation officially entered its second year. By then, hundreds of children across the U.S. had received support not just through medical aid, but through visits, shared stories, and the little silver cars that quietly carried a message. You can do something, right now. Alexander Reed was no longer a symbol of financial might. To those who met him in hospital hallways, school libraries, or community centers, he was simply a gentle man-eyes that listened, hands that held pain, and a heart slowly relearning how to beat for others. And then he proposed something new. The Day of Fighters. Not a gala, not a press event, but a festival dedicated solely to children who had battled through life-threatening illness. No fancy clothes, no speeches, just smiles and the memories of what it meant to be strong. Noah was the first to receive an invitation, but he didn't just want to attend as a guest of honor. He looked at Alexander and said, "I want to say something to Liam." Alexander blinked in surprise. "Are you sure?" "You don't have to." Noah cut him off gently but firmly. "I need to. For me." The event was held in a wide park near Hope Hill Hospital. The stage was simple, made of plain wood. Chairs were set in a large circle so everyone could see everyone else. Nearly 150 children and their families came. Some wore leg braces. Some still had patchy hair from chemotherapy. Some had recently survived their second bone marrow transplant. But all of them carried a glow in their eyes, a light that only comes from those who have returned from the edge of death. Alexander stood at the back of the stage. He wouldn't speak. He didn't need to. The event opened with a short film chronicling the Foundation's journey. From the very first silver car, to quiet hugs in hospital corridors, to storybooks left half-finished, to the smallest smiles behind IV lines. When the screen went dark, the host called Noah to the stage. He stepped forward, holding a folded piece of paper. A soft breeze tugged at his hair. He looked around then, found Alexander, who gave a quiet nod of encouragement. Noah took a deep breath and began to read. "Dear Liam, I don't really know where to begin, because there are so many things I've wanted to say, but never had the chance. When I met you, I was just a kid in a hospital, bed-scared, tired, and not sure I'd make it to summer. But then you came, with a book, a silver car, and a promise. You said, 'This car is as fast as you'll be someday.' And I kept it. I believed in it because I believed in you. Then one day, you didn't come back. I was angry, not because you left, but because no one told me why, until I saw your face on TV and learned your real name. Everything changed after that. I met your dad, the man I thought was the most distant person in the world, and I discovered he was looking for you too. I don't know why I got to be part of this story, but because of you, I didn't just survive. I got a grandfather, I got a family, and I got a reason to keep going. Maybe you're somewhere far away now, but if you can hear this, I just want to say thank you for never leaving me behind, for loving without needing credit. I'll keep going. I'll pass the silver car to the next kid who needs it. And I promise, more kids will hear the story of a boy named Liam, who once sat on a hospital floor and taught us how to live. Love. Noah. By the time he finished, no one remained in their seat. A 7-year-old ran up and hugged him. Then a girl, her hair just beginning to grow back, took his hand. A group of nurses wept quietly. A mother pressed her hands together, as if thanking something far beyond words. Alexander stood behind the stage, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. Not tears of grief, not regret, but of deep, undeniable knowing. Liam was still alive, not in breath, but in every word, every gaze, every heart awakened by his memory. That night, back home, Noah placed the silver car on the shelf. Next to it, a photo of Liam reading to a child, young and serene. Noah turned to Alexander. "Do you think if Liam were alive, he'd be sitting here with us?" Alexander smiled softly. I think he already is. And we don't need to see him to know he's still here." Noah nodded, climbed into bed, pulled the blanket up, and closed his eyes, his heart lighter than the days he once spent alone, afraid of operating room lights. And Alexander stayed behind, gazing at the silver car glowing faintly under the night lamp. In that quiet, one truth settled within him. The true legacy of a person isn't measured by how long they lived. but by who still stands, because they once touched a life. A soft rain fell along Interstate 5. In the front seat of a quiet SUV, Alexander Reed held a printed list names pulled from Hope Hill's old hospital archives. Over 120 children who had once been visited by Liam West. Most entries bore only brief notes. Read comic book. Brought toy. Name unknown. Beside him, Noah dozed off, clutching his small backpack. Inside, the silver toy car, Liam's old notebook, and a faded teddy bear. The bear wasn't originally Liam's Everady. It had belonged to a girl he once comforted. Years later, she returned it to the foundation with a note. If someone else needs peaceful sleep, let this bear be near them. Their destination that day was Bakersfield, a modest city where a 17-year-old girl named Isabel Tran now lived with her family. She had once been a leukemia patient at Hope Hillenly, 8 years old at the time. And according to Nurse Maria, who had cared for her, Isabel was one of the children most deeply impacted by Liam even, though she never knew his name. The SUV pulled up in front of a light brown house, its porch framed by draping purple bougainvillea. Alexander stepped out first. Noah followed quietly, his expression focused, as if carrying something sacred. The door opened. Isabel stood there, a petite young woman with long black hair and luminous eyes. She looked surprised, and when Alexander said, "I'm the father of Liam West," she froze. Wait, was he really the one who came to Hope Hill? Alexander nodded and offered a photo. It showed Liam, a college-age volunteer, seated between 3 children, reading Charlotte's Web aloud. Isabel lifted a hand to her mouth, holding back a breath. "It's him." She invited them in. On the coffee table sat a small framed photo, her younger self, bald from treatment, beaming as she hugged a teddy bear in a superhero shirt. Noah recognized it instantly. It was the same bear tucked in his backpack. He unzipped the bag, retrieved the bear, and gently placed it before her. Isabel's voice broke. "That's Cookie Bear." Every time he brought it, his backpack smelled like cinnamon cookies. Alexander remained silent, reverent. Noah asked softly, "Do you remember the first night Liam gave it to you?" Isabel nodded, eyes glassy. "It was my 6th night in the hospital. My mom had to leave for work. I couldn't sleep. I cried a lot. He came in, didn't say much, just placed the bear in my arms and whispered, 'This bear has magic. It knows how to soothe special kids.' Then he read to me until I fell asleep." She paused, then chuckled through her tears. "He came every night after that, always with cookies. Never told me his name. He just said I could call him Storyteller Number 5. Alexander gripped his hands. He'd once believed he knew his sonth business student, the quiet thinker, the boy who rarely showed emotion, but he had never met Storyteller Number 5. Isabel stood, retrieved a small box from a drawer. Inside were folded paper heartstiny notes Liam had written to her during that time. She handed them to Noah. "You can keep these. They're his words. There's one line I've never forgotten, though I still don't know why it stuck." Noah unfolded a slip. One line, "Tonight, you don't have to be brave alone." Later, as they prepared to leave, Isabel walked Alexander out to the porch. She said quietly, "I used to think I'd never share this story, because for me, it was something sacred. But now, I understand. Some things should be shared not for attention, but so they can ripple outward." Alexander nodded. "Thank you. Not because you remembered my son, but because you lived out what he wanted most, to be kind, even when no one was watching." Tears welled in Isabel's eyes. As they said goodbye, she added, "I'm starting nursing school next fall, and I hope one day I'll sit beside a scared child, just like he once did for me." On the drive home, Noah remained quiet. He unfolded and refolded the little paper hearts with care. Then, softly, he said, "I think Liam didn't choose to help the weak. He chose those who could be strong if someone just believed in them." Alexander nodded, touching the silver car gently. "And now, we keep doing that, believing in those who are waiting to be strong." The SUV slipped through the mist, heading south. Ahead of them, more cities, more children, more people who had never known Liam's name, but who had once been saved by a hug, a teddy bear, a cookie, and a whispered promise. "Tonight, you don't have to be brave alone." It had been exactly 1 year since Alexander Reed first saw Noah standing silently before his son's grave. One year since he'd placed a white rose and prepared to walk away just as he had every year before, until a little boy with a silver toy car stepped into his life like an unfinished melody waiting to be completed. This time, everything felt different. No heavy clouds, no gloom. The sun pierced through a layer of gentle mist, casting warm rays across the grass. The cemetery was still, but not cold. The breeze was light, tinged with the scent of wildflowers. Alexander wore a white shirt and a soft wool cardigan. No stiff business suit. No hardened posture of a man bracing for grief. He walked slowly, but steadily. Beside him, Noah had grown a little taller, a little wiser. But in his hands was still the silver car. This time, it was nestled in a wooden box, lined with silk, inscribed with the words, "Liam's first gift, forever moving." They stopped at the same old headstone, the same words carved deep. Liam James Reed, beloved son, forever missed. But the people standing before it had changed entirely. Alexander knelt down. From his pocket, he pulled a single white rose. He placed it gently on the soft earth, then whispered, "Liam, you're not here, but you're everywhere." He opened a small notebook new, thick with pages. Inside were hundreds of letters, drawings, and messages from children the foundation had touched this past year. Some were misspelled. Some were messy, with crooked hearts and rainbow smudges. But all of them radiated something pure, something beyond words: love. Noah opened the wooden box, lifted the silver car, and set it beside the grave. "Liam," he said softly, "this car has been everywhere. Hospitals, schools, remote towns. It helped people be brave like you helped me. But today, I'm bringing it home." Alexander watched the car sparkle in the morning sun. He then reached into his coat and pulled out an old letter sealed, worn at the edges. On the envelope, a single line, "For my son when I'm ready." He placed it gently next to the car, inhaling deeply. There were no tears in his eyes, only light. They sat beside the grave for an hour. No words. No need for them. It no longer felt like a place of endings. It felt like a beginning. On the drive home, Alexander's phone rang. It was Dr. Rowe from Hope Hill. "Logan, the boy who once only said Liam's name, today, he said his first full sentence. I want to be a doctor like him." Alexander froze. Noah looked at him, eyes wide with hope. Alexander ended the call and smiled. "Liam just made another little doctor." Noah grinned. He pulled out a scrap of paper and scribbled a line by hand, then held it up for Alexander to read. "Today, I think, Liam isn't just alive. He's growing through everyone he's touched." That night, in the warm apartment, Alexander took the framed photo of Liam and placed it somewhere new. No longer in the center of a display shelf, but beside a photo of the three of them, himself, Noah, and Rachel, taken at the recent graduation ceremony for students recovering from long-term illness. The picture was simple. No one dressed up, but every face glowed like sunlight breaking through after a storm. Alexander whispered, "Liam, I'm not afraid to be a father anymore." And for the first time in years, he turned off the bedroom light without leaving the door cracked open. He no longer needed to leave a path for the past to return, because the past had transformed into the future. Liam James Reed left this world at 21. No prestigious titles, no grand achievements, no statues were built, no degree hung on a wall of power. But he lived long enough to touch hundreds of hearts, deeply enough to turn every minute of his presence into light for someone else. He didn't leave behind wealth, but he left behind silver toy cars that traveled across the country. He didn't leave behind lofty quotes, but he left behind one simple line: "You don't have to be brave alone." And from that very sentence, a father who once believed he had lost everything found himself again. A boy who survived illness stepped forward to carry the legacy. A teddy bear once, just a toy, became a sanctuary for lonely children trying to sleep through the night. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you wonder if anything you do matters in this vast, complicated world. Maybe you think you're too small to make a difference. But if a young man with no fame, no fortune, and not much time could still change the course of hundreds of lives, then so can you. You don't have to wait to be wealthy. You don't need approval. You don't need a camera to capture it. All you need to do is show up. When someone's hurting, when someone's afraid, When the world seems to turn its back on them. And believe this, you don't have to do something big. Sometimes, all it takes is to sit beside them, hold a book, offer a toy, or simply say one thing. You don't have to be brave alone.